Welcome back to the Centered on Buffalo podcast. In this episode, we are going to look at what the Bills are looking for at this 2025 NFL Combine. We're going to start off by giving a shout out to our friends at Waterboy. They're my favorite electrolytes in the game. This is my favorite one here, the workout hydration. It adds a little glutamine in there, gives you electrolytes you need to fuel your workout. When you get that sweat in, you need electrolytes. And this has got way more electrolytes than the leading sports drinks out there. I also, from time to time, have to use their weekend recovery one, which is specifically used on the weekends, maybe when some beverages are consumed. So go check them out. A link is in the description to the podcast. Use code Eric Wood at checkout. Get you a nice discount. So go check them out. And thank you, Waterboy, for supporting the show. If you haven't already, please subscribe to this podcast. Show us some support. Maybe share these episodes with some friends. Share them on social media. We'll shout you out as well for doing that. And thank you for everyone who's been doing that. And so this week, the Bills are going to travel to Indianapolis. It'll be the full staff there. The entire front office will be in attendance for this. And they're going to have a number of things that they're looking at this week. Sean McDermott met with the media this week and talked about how he doesn't look at any of the prospects before the combine. Now, part of that is because the Bills have been advancing pretty far in the postseason, so he doesn't have a ton of time to do that. He's got to decompress at the season. There's stuff they got to look at just internally after the season before they can look externally about the prospects that they want to bring in. But there's people in the organization that have been working on this all year long. This is what they do. Their whole job is to look at the college prospects. And so while Sean has been prepping on this, there's many people in the organization that have been prepping all year long on this. And they're going to examine all the players in this draft, all positions. And frankly, because for one, they pick later in the draft. This year, they're at pick 30. And so sometimes you got to see what falls to you. And it might not be a specific position in need, but it might just be the best player available. Now, the Bills do have some needs. We'll get to those. But a lot of times you're scouting everybody in case someone falls to you and you say, look, this guy is too good to pass up on here. This is going to be a day one starter for us, impact player. I don't care what position it is. We're going to go out and take them. And so they're going to do their homework and they're going to examine, they're going to interview all of the positions at this year's draft, but then they'll also specifically focus in on their positions of need. And Sean had an interesting interview that he did with Josh Reed that I watched, and he talked about that specifically for defensive linemen, that they're looking for explosion and power. And to me, that says a lot about what they feel like they might need up front to add, and whether that's through the draft or through free agency or trades. They're looking for more explosion and power from their defensive line to be able to impact the quarterback. And a lot of that is they're trying to mimic what the Eagles did to the Chiefs in the postseason. And when you look around the AFC, whether it's Lamar Jackson or Joe Burrow or Patrick Mahomes, to get to the Super Bowl, you got to be able to affect the passer with a four-man rush. We've talked about that all the time, that I feel like that is one of the things that has consistently kept the Bills out of the Super Bowl. Sean McDermott recognized that they want to find explosion and power, and there's plenty of it in this year's draft. This is a deep draft for defensive linemen. I'm going to give a quick shout out to our podcast sponsor, Dano's Seasoning. And look, I've told you before, it's my favorite seasoning out there. It's all natural, no sugar. It's a healthy product, but it's also a great product, and they will make you look good all year long when you're cooking at home or cooking for friends. You got a barbecue, a tailgate, whatever it may be. Let Dano's Seasoning make you look good. Use the link, danoseasoning.com. That'll be in the description, or go check them out at a retailer store near you. Yum, yum, get you some. And so I mentioned that defensive line could be a need for the Bills. And look, that could be in the first round this year. I don't think you can ever have enough great defensive linemen on a roster, guys that can impact the game up front, play on the other side of the line of scrimmage at times, especially with this Bills penetrating style that they have on their defensive line. So I think that they're going to look heavy into the defensive line. When you look at safety for this team, DeMar Hamlin might not be back. He was a starter for this year. You have Cole Bishop and you have Taylor Rapp under contract, but there's some interesting safety prospects in this draft. And as we get closer to the draft, we'll look at, specific players, specific names, but, we can just look at positions right now. Sean McDermott said in his press conference at the Combine that the Bills, need to find a wide receiver to stretch the field. Now he said horizontally and vertically. This doesn't just mean a guy that can burn down the field, but also stretch the field horizontally where you put a lot of pressure on a defense with that type of speed. And so, I mentioned the previous podcast where, 40 times don't always matter. They want to see guys play fast on the field and in the film that they're watching, but I also think they could be watching, 40 times this year. And, a lot of people are going to point to, well, they had the chance to draft Xavier Worthy last year. Well, they didn't feel like he fit what they exactly wanted, but it could be a similar type of player, a guy that can just be a burner out there on this Bills offense to keep the safeties deep. You get man-to-man coverage to run away from a guy across the field. I think that could be another one. And then corner could be a position of need. Kyrie Elam still hasn't, kind of come into form with the Bills. I still think he can. I think he's got the skill set and the drive. He's got another full offseason to prove himself, but we'll see what the Bills end up doing with Rasul Douglas opposite Christian Benford. They got an absolute stud in Christian Benford. They found him late in the draft. That's the Bills doing homework on, guys that could potentially fall on him. And you draft him when, corner might not have exactly been a position in need. They drafted Kyrie Elam in the first round already, but they draft Christian Benford later in the draft, 5th or 6th round, I believe 6th round draft pick. And then he's an absolute stud for the Bills. So I think they'll be looking at corner as well, find a guy opposite Christian Benford. And then, in the NFL, corners are tough to find. You got to pay them a bunch of money when you do find them. And so drafting those guys can be very valuable. And so I think that they'll look at that as well. The Bills have a bunch of draft picks in this year's draft. So even if there's a guy that might not fall to them at pick 30, they have some draft capital that they could potentially move up in the draft. So they're going to be scouting guys, maybe that they think could maybe fall outside the top 15. I don't think that they'd mortgage enough of those draft picks or mortgage enough of future draft picks to move up higher than maybe 15 to 20, but they're going to be scouting a lot more guys than just guys that can fall to pick 30. And it might be one of those impact defensive linemen that are coming out in this year's draft. And then a final note of what the Bills are going to be looking at and doing at this year's combine is they're going to be maybe talking to some agents this week. And I don't even mean maybe. They'll be talking to agents this week. Hey, what's this free agent thinking? Hey, is this guy a possibility for a trade? What kind of money would this guy be looking for if we brought him in? If we traded for this guy, would he be willing to just sign and play and then we work on a deal later? Is it going to be sign and trade for him and sign him new contract immediately? So a lot of those contracts are going to be talked about this week. And, those restaurants around Indianapolis are buzzing this week. They're buzzing with, all the media there. It's great for them to catch up with other guys. And I've been up there before. It's a ton of fun just connecting with a bunch of people that you generally only see in a work setting. And now you get to see them out and about a little bit, have, different conversations than you would just, the 10 minutes you catch up prior to a game. But they're also going to be buzzing with personnel, people from every different team. The agents will all be in there and they're going to be talking ball. And, I heard a funny story from John Gruden this week talking with Ozzie Newsome at a bar in Indianapolis where he was talking about getting Darren Waller and signing him off of the Ravens practice squad, and about how Ozzie Newsome said that he'd never work his guys out on the field before a game again because Darren Waller apparently was working out with the practice squad guys before the game, and the Ravens were getting ready to play the Ravens. Ravens were getting ready to play the Raiders, and the Raiders saw how fast Darren Waller was as a tight end. They signed him off the Ravens practice squad. He becomes an absolute stud, multiple-time Pro Bowler. Well, that conversation is something that came out of the NFL Combine. That story came out of the conversations that were had there. So those restaurants are going to be buzzing this week. There's also going to just be a lot of coaches that get to catch up with, other coaches that they coach with. I remember one late night at the NFL Combine after I was done playing. I was up in Indianapolis meeting with some people, talking a few business things, and ended up at one of the restaurant bars late night, and they'll keep those places open super late. Those coaches are used to working on very little sleep, so they can go out and do their job the next day after maybe hanging at the bar and catching up with guys. This league recycles coaches, and those staffs get split up, and guys are all over. So it's an awesome opportunity for them to catch up with friends as well. So a lot more fun probably for the coaches this week than it is for the guys that are actually going in there and participating. And we talked about some of the pros and cons of the NFL Combine from a player's perspective in the previous episode. If you haven't listened to that, go check that one out. I think you'll enjoy it. But from a Bills perspective this year, they're going to be looking at their prospects. They're doing their homework on everybody at the Combine just because people could fall to them. You can find steals later in the draft, and they're going to have a lot of conversations about who they're going to potentially bring in here in free agency or via a trade here coming up in the next month or so. Thank you for tuning into the podcast. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe, like it, comment on it, share with a friend. I appreciate you all for tuning in.